The morning after the wedding, I saw my husband in my mother-in-law's bedroom and froze on the spot. A heartbreaking story. The air in the guest room smelled sweet, a cloying mix of day-old champagne, wilting roses, and the faint, sugary ghost of buttercream frosting. I opened my eyes to the pale morning light filtering through the expensive silk curtains in my mother-in-law's house. For a moment, I was adrift, unsure of where I was. Then, a heavy, unfamiliar weight on my left hand brought it all back in a joyful, dizzying rush. The diamond, the wedding band. I was married. I, Sarah Jenkins, was now Sarah Peterson, a wife. The thought sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated happiness through my veins, chasing away the last vestiges of sleep. I rolled over, a smile already forming on my lips, ready to whisper a sleepy good morning to my husband. The other side of the king-sized bed was empty. The sheets were cool and undisturbed, looking as if no one had ever been there at all. My smile faltered for just a second. Mark. He was an early riser, always had been. Even on weekends, he'd be up at the crack of dawn, the smell of freshly brewed coffee his signature greeting. I imagined him downstairs right now, probably in the impossibly pristine kitchen of his mother, Eleanor, already showered and dressed, waiting for me. He'd probably let me sleep in, a small, thoughtful gesture on our first morning as husband and wife. I stretched, my muscles aching in that pleasant way they do after a night of dancing and celebration. The wedding had been perfect, a fairy tale. Eleanor had insisted on hosting the reception at her sprawling home in the suburbs of Columbus, turning her manicured backyard into something out of a magazine. White tents, fairy lights strung through the old oak trees, a string quartet. It was more than I, a girl who grew up in a small, two-bedroom apartment, could have ever dreamed of. Eleanor had been a force of nature during the planning. Every detail, from the shade of the napkins to the font on the invitations, had to pass her exacting standards. "Only the best for my boy," she'd say with a tight, polished smile, her hand often lingering on Mark's arm. At the time, I'd found it endearing, if a little overbearing. She was a widow, and Mark was her only child. Of course, their bond was special. I told myself her intensity was just a mother's love, powerful and a bit possessive, but ultimately harmless. I pushed myself out of bed, grabbing the silk robe Eleanor had laid out for me. It was a pearly white, far more luxurious than anything I owned. Everything in this house was luxurious. The carpets were so thick my feet sank into them, and the silence was so profound it felt like a physical presence. I padded out of the guest room and into the long, sun-drenched hallway. "Mark," I called out softly, my voice sounding small in the vast quiet. No answer. I headed for the grand curving staircase, my hand trailing along the polished wood of the banister. The ground floor was deserted. The living room, which had been buzzing with 100 guests just hours before, was now immaculate. The caterers had done an incredible job. The only evidence of the party was a mountain of beautifully wrapped gifts piled on a large mahogany table, a monument to our new life together. I walked into the kitchen. It was gleaming, sterile. The chrome appliances reflected a distorted version of me in my borrowed robe. The coffee machine was off, the pot clean and dry. My first flicker of real unease started then. A tiny, cold pinprick in my chest. Mark would never wake up without making coffee. It was a ritual as essential to him as breathing. It was one of the first things I learned about him. That small, insignificant detail felt profoundly wrong. "Eleanor?" I called out, a little louder this time. The silence that answered was heavy, absolute. Maybe they went for a walk. It was a beautiful morning. Or perhaps a quick run to the store for fresh bagels. My mind scrambled for a logical, innocent explanation. But why wouldn't they have left a note? Why wouldn't Mark have woken me? We were supposed to have a lazy morning, open gifts, and bask in our newlywed bubble before heading off for our honeymoon in 2 days. This wasn't part of the plan. I checked the back patio. Nothing but neatly arranged wicker furniture and the lingering scent of last night's floral arrangements. I felt a growing sense of foolishness, like a child lost in a department store. The house was enormous, a maze of perfect, soulless rooms. I wandered back into the foyer, my heart now beating a little faster. That was when I saw it. Lying near the bottom step of the grand staircase was a single, patent leather dress shoe. Mark's, the one he wore with his tuxedo. It was on its side, looking forlorn and abandoned. Why would he take one shoe off here? It made no sense. It was a detail so bizarre, so out of place in this house of perfect order, that the cold pinprick in my chest bloomed into a full-blown knot of dread. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, a primal instinct screaming at me that the world was not as it seemed just 10 minutes ago. I turned and looked back up the long, silent staircase toward the second floor, and the knot in my stomach tightened into a vice. The logical explanations were melting away, replaced by a formless, terrifying premonition. My feet felt like lead as I forced myself to climb the stairs again, each creak of the polished wood sounding like a gunshot in the oppressive silence. The home that felt so luxurious and welcoming just an hour ago now felt like a mausoleum, cold, imposing, and full of secrets. I walked down the upstairs hallway, my own soft footfalls echoing back at me. I passed our guest room, the door still ajar. I passed the pristine guest bathroom, its door closed. At the very end of the hall was the master suite, Eleanor's bedroom, and its door, usually kept firmly shut, was now open. Just a crack, a sliver of darkness in the bright, sunlit corridor. A low sound drifted from within, so quiet I almost thought I'd imagined it. A murmur, a voice. It was Mark. Relief warred with my anxiety. Of course, how silly of me. Eleanor probably felt unwell after the exertion of the party. Maybe she had a headache or felt faint. Mark, ever the dutiful son, was just checking on her. That had to be it. I told myself that over and over as I crept closer, my hand pressed against my chest to quiet my frantic heartbeat. As I got nearer, I could hear his voice more clearly, but it wasn't the concerned, practical tone he used when someone was sick. It was low, intimate, and impossibly soft. Then I heard her voice, Eleanor's, and the chill in my bones intensified. It was a velvety, contented purr. "You were just magnificent last night, my boy," she said. My breath caught in my throat. She was probably talking about his wedding speech. It had been beautiful. He'd spoken about me with such love, such adoration that I'd cried. My father cried. Everyone was moved. That's what she meant. She was just a proud mother. "Did you see their faces?" Mark's voice replied, a low chuckle weaving through his words. "Everyone bought it, every last word." My blood ran cold. Bought what? Bought that he loved me? No, that couldn't be it. I was mishearing, taking it out of context. My mind was playing tricks on me, fueled by post-wedding exhaustion. I reached the door, my body moving on autopilot, and peered through the crack. The angle was awkward. I could see a portion of Eleanor's enormous, ornate bed draped in what looked like gold-colored satin. I saw Mark's back. He was sitting on the edge of the mattress, still wearing the trousers from his tuxedo and his crisp white dress shirt, now unbuttoned halfway down his chest. He was leaning toward someone I couldn't fully see, who was propped up against a mountain of pillows. Then Eleanor shifted, bringing a hand up to brush something from his hair, and my stomach plummeted. She wasn't sick. She was wearing a delicate, lace-trimmed silk nightgown, the kind a woman wears for a lover, not when she's feeling ill. My hand trembled as I pushed the door open another inch. The hinges didn't creak. The scene unfolded before me like a silent, horrific play. Eleanor was sitting up in her bed, looking as regal and composed as a queen. Her silver-blonde hair was perfect, even after a night's sleep. A faint, smug smile played on her perfectly painted lips. And Mark, my husband Mark, was holding her hand. His left hand, with the brand-new wedding band glittering under the morning light, was entwined with his mother's. It wasn't a comforting, son-to-mother gesture. It was possessive, familiar. The way he held my hand. I stood there, paralyzed, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. It was a tableau of impossible intimacy. The air was thick with her perfume, the same expensive scent she'd worn at the wedding. It filled my lungs and I felt like I was going to be sick. They hadn't seen me. They were lost in their own world, in their own bubble of shared history I was just now realizing I had never been invited into. I tried to back away, to retreat into the hallway and pretend I'd seen nothing. but my feet were rooted to the floor. I was a statue carved from ice and disbelief. Then Mark leaned forward and the final piece of the horrifying puzzle clicked into place. He didn't kiss her forehead or her cheek. He leaned in and pressed his lips against hers. It wasn't a quick familial peck. It was slow, soft, and lingering, a kiss of deep, established affection. And Eleanor, his mother, lifted her own face to meet his, her eyes fluttering shut as her free hand came up to cradle the back of his head, her fingers tangling in his hair. They were kissing. My husband and his mother were kissing like lovers. A sound escaped my throat, a choked, broken gasp. It was barely a whisper, but in the thick silence of that room, it was as loud as a scream. They broke apart. Mark's head snapped up, and his eyes found me standing in the doorway. Just was no panic in his gaze. No shame, no shock, just irritation. A flash of pure annoyance, as if I were a nosy maid who had stumbled into a private meeting. He looked at me, a stranger, an inconvenience who had shattered their moment. Eleanor's reaction was worse. She didn't even have the decency to look startled. Her smile widened, a cold, sharp, triumphant curve of her lips. She looked me up and down, taking in my borrowed robe and my horrified expression, and her eyes glinted with what I could only describe as victory. Mark? The name was a fragile thing, shattering as it left my lips. It didn't sound like my own voice. He slowly detached his hand from his mother's and stood up, smoothing down his wrinkled shirt in a gesture of unnerving normalcy. "Sarah," he said, his voice completely flat, devoid of any emotion. "You're awake." His tone was so casual, he might as well have been commenting on the weather. My entire world had just detonated, and he was acting like I'd just walked in on him reading the newspaper. Then Eleanor spoke, her voice dripping with a condescending sweetness that was more painful than any shout. "Well, the little bride is finally up," she purred, adjusting a satin pillow behind her back. "Did you sleep well, dear?" The endearment was a dagger, twisted with deliberate cruelty. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't the bride. I was the prop, and the show was over. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. A strange glacial numbness washed over me, encasing my heart in a protective layer of ice. I just stared at them, at this grotesque parody of a family portrait. The man I had pledged my life to just yesterday, and his mother who looked at me not as a daughter-in-law, but as a vanquished rival. I took a step back, then another, my body finally obeying my mind's desperate command to flee. I turned and ran. I didn't sprint, but my legs carried me with a numb robotic efficiency back down the hallway to the guest room. I slammed the door behind me, the sound echoing the shattering of my life. My suitcase was still open on the luggage rack, half unpacked. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely grasp the zipper on my toiletry bag. Get out. The thought was a relentless drumbeat in my head. Just get out. As I fumbled to throw my things into the bag, my eyes fell on the nightstand beside the bed. There was a small silver picture frame lying face down, something I hadn't noticed before. Driven by a morbid, self-destructive curiosity, I picked it up. I turned it over. It was a photo of Mark and Eleanor, taken years ago. They were on a beautiful, sun-drenched beach. Mark, looking about 20, had his arm wrapped tightly around Eleanor's waist. She was wearing a bikini, and he was in swim trunks. They were smiling for the camera, their heads tilted together, their bodies pressed close. It wasn't a mother-son photo. It was a couple's photo. The kind you take on a romantic getaway. The kind Mark and I were supposed to take on our honeymoon. The wedding wasn't the beginning of the lie. It was just the latest chapter. My whole relationship with him, our 2 years together, had been a performance. I had been cast in a role without ever seeing the script. A knock on the door made me jump. "Sarah?" It was Mark. "Sarah, let me in. We need to talk." I didn't answer. I just stood there, staring at the photograph, the smiling faces of the two people who had conspired to destroy me. I walked over to the door and unlocked it, but I didn't open it. I went back to my suitcase, zipped it shut with one final decisive pull, and lifted it off the rack. I walked past him as he stood in the doorway, his face a mask of practiced concern. "Sarah, please," he said, reaching for my arm. I flinched away from his touch as if from a hot iron. Where are you going? Don't be hysterical. We can work through this." "Work through what?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. "That my marriage is a sham? That my husband is in a relationship with his mother?" He had the gall to look offended. "It's not like that. It's more complex. She's been my only constant. My father was never there for us. She's all I've ever had. She needed this. She needed to know I'd be taken care of, that I'd have a normal life." The gaslighting was so profound, so audacious, it almost took my breath away. He was framing this sickness as a sacrifice. I was just a component for his normal life, a broodmare to provide the heir his mother desired, a beard for a truth too dark for the world to see. A profound clarity washed over me. I wasn't just going to leave, I was going to erase them. I looked down at my left hand, at the heavy, beautiful ring that now felt like a shackle. With a steady hand, I pulled the engagement ring and the wedding band off my finger. They felt warm from my skin. I turned to him, held out my palm, and dropped them into his. "I think," I said, my voice low and steady, "these belong to her." His face crumpled, not in remorse, but in the frustration of a plan gone awry. I didn't wait for a response. I walked right past him, my suitcase bumping against my leg. I walked down that grand staircase, past the mountain of obscene wedding gifts, and straight to the front door. I pulled it open and stepped out into the brilliant, unforgiving sunlight. The perfect suburban street looked fake, like a movie set. The world felt silent for a moment, and then the sound of a bird chirping in a nearby tree brought me back. I was free. Broken, but free. In my car, driving away, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. I didn't need to. The image of that perfect house, with its perfect lawn and the ugly, twisted secret it held within, was already burned into my memory forever. I was driving toward an unknown future, with nothing but a suitcase and a shattered heart. And yet, for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I could finally breathe.